Recently, Harper's Magazine published a lead story by the Princeton historian Matthew Karp. And in that, he did a sort of sophisticated critique of the 1619 Project. His basic argument was that these are guys who look at American history as frozen. Racism was baked into the DNA from the beginning, 1619, and there hasn't really been any real change. There have been cosmetic changes, but the cosmetic changes have only concealed deeper forms of oppression. So it's kind of this almost monomaniacal, repetitive narrative that doesn't really acknowledge substantive and meaningful change. And I think that Matthew Karp knows that it's a lie, it's a distortion of American history. But he wants to have the credibility to say that on the left. And so what does he do? He bashes conservatives, notably me, in which he says things like, that we present these preposterous views of history. He doesn't say what the preposterous views really are. In fact, he says something like, D'Souza's shtick is immune to facts and logic and frankly indifferent to ideological consistency. Now, you think someone who makes this kind of a broad generalization would need to substantiate it, give like 3 examples of where I have said either inconsistent things or things that are, quote, immune to facts and logic. So, of course, I thought, look, it'd be interesting to invite this guy to a discussion, invite him to come on the podcast. And interestingly, I got a note from Julia Malucci, the vice president of Harper, saying, I'm thrilled you're game to have a conversation with Matthew Karp about his Harper's Magazine cover story. And she goes, I'd love to see this happen. And I even suggested debating at Princeton. And she goes, I like your Princeton idea too. And of course, I realize that this woman is a little naive. Wait till she talks to Matthew Karp. This guy's most likely to be hiding under his desk when he hears my name. He doesn't want to go toe-to-toe with me. Usually when that happens, the results are painful for the leftist. And so she's like, I'll approach him. I'll see what he says. But of course, the guy seems to be ducking because I keep writing Julia Malucci to find out has he agreed. And she won't say if he's agreed or not. But she just kind of sends me excerpts from his article as if those are kind of self-explanatory. Now, interestingly, this dude, Matthew Karp, has an interview in Slate from a few days ago. And he makes a really interesting point, and I think this is really why he's troubled by the work I've been doing both in my books and in my movies. He says basically that conservatives, sort of driven by me and a few others, are not identifying with the so-called lost cause, with the Confederacy. We are openly embracing the legacy of Lincoln. We're openly embracing the Republican role in bringing about the end of slavery. We are championing the cause of Lincoln and of the Union. And he says that this is actually a problem for the left because it's not easy for the left to respond to it. Factually, it's indisputable that Republicans were the party of the Union. It's indisputable that the Republicans mobilized the force against slavery. Lincoln, of course, was the one who issued the Emancipation Proclamation, and whatever its inadequacies, it was in fact the first mortal blow against slavery. Ultimately, slavery ended with not just with the surrender at Appomattox, but then with the 13th Amendment, also passed by the Republican Party. So Karp knows all this. And I think what he's really worried about is that the left 1619 project, racism has existed, it's always existed, not just 1776. You have to go back to the first guys who came to America. By the way, the first Africans who came to America were not slaves. They came as indentured servants, the same as the Europeans. And this has been actually well documented now. So at its root, 1619 is based upon a false premise that slavery began directly in America in 1619. Factually untrue. And So what you have with Karp here is he's now talking about the fact that he says, I'm sort of fascinating. And he says, it's fascinating the extent to which D'Souza, Dennis Prager, and these other people accept the story of emancipation. He goes, they're not interested in tying themselves to the mast of the Confederacy. In other words, we're not interested in tying ourselves to the mast of the racist Democrats. And then he says they're not interested in sentimentalism over the Confederacy. They would much rather play the strong card. America is great in part because we destroyed slavery. And then he sums up the conservative narrative. We beat Nazism, America did. We beat communism, America did. And America beat slavery. And he says that this is the problem for the left. So I think here Matthew Karp is onto something. He's onto the power of the conservative counterattack. It's not the kind of old National Review argument which was somewhat sympathetic to the South. I mean, these ridiculous conservatives would say things like, well, you know, we can't say that one side was absolutely right and the other side was absolutely wrong. Slavery is an institution that's existed for centuries. Yes, the moves for civil rights reform are useful, but let's go slow with them. I mean, I think that this kind of pathetic excuse for conservatism was really easy for the left to attack. In fact, it made conservatives conserve the tradition of the racist Democrats. I mean, how obtuse, how stupid. Karp is correct that part of what I tried to spearhead is a move away from this kind of ridiculous, self-defeating argument toward a full-throated embrace of the Republican side. I mean, conservatism is naturally allied with the Republicans now. Why wouldn't we want to be historically allied with this wonderful legacy of the Republican Party in fighting slavery, fighting segregation, fighting racial terrorism, fighting Jim Crow, and voting disproportionately both for the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and the Fair Housing Bill? This is the actual tradition of the Republican Party, and as conservatives, that's the tradition we should seek to conserve.